The Tuesday night shift at the corner diner was supposed to be like any other. Cheap coffee refills, the hiss of the griddle, and regulars swapping tired jokes after work. For Eliza Hollet, 24 years old and exhausted from double shifts, this tiny fluorescent-lit diner was her battlefield. She wasn't chasing tips for new shoes or vacations. Every dollar she made was going straight to the hospital that kept her mother alive. That night, the bell above the door jingled, and the atmosphere shifted in an instant. A man stepped inside, and it felt as if the air itself grew heavier. He wasn't the usual type who stumbled in for burgers and fries. His suit was cut with surgical precision, the kind that cost more than Eliza had earned all year. His shoes shone under the greasy lights, and even his silence commanded the room. Conversations dipped, forks paused, and a few customers lowered their eyes. Eliza forced on her waitress smile, grabbed a menu, and approached his booth. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you started with something to drink?" "Coffee." "Black," he said, voice low and polished, like the sound of a cello. It was only when he reached for the cup that Eliza saw it. The glint of gold, the sharp etching of a phoenix with wings outstretched, and the single sapphire eye that shimmered like trapped fire. Her heart skipped. That ring. That exact ring. She had seen it 1,000 times, resting inside a velvet box on her mother's nightstand. The words slipped out before she could stop herself. "Sir, my mom has the same ring." The man froze, his hand hovering over the cup. Slowly, he lifted his eyes, ice blue and cutting into her like knives. The casual indifference was gone. In its place, something darker. Shock, anger, and maybe even fear. "What did you just say?" His tone was quiet, but it was the quiet of thunder right before it splits the sky. Eliza's voice trembled. "The ring, on your hand. My mother has one just like it." He studied her, each second, stretching like hours. Then he leaned back, lips curling into a faint smile that never touched his eyes. "That's impossible. This ring has been in my family for over a century. There is no other." Heat burned Eliza's cheeks. She wasn't mistaken. She could draw every line of that phoenix from memory. "I swear, sir, it's the same. My mom has kept it her whole life. She always said it was one of a kind." The smile faded. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Then your mother is either a liar or a thief." The words hit harder than a slap. Eliza's knees went weak. Her mother, the most honest woman she knew, accused of theft by a stranger who radiated power. The man reached into his wallet, pulled out crisp bills, and tossed them onto the table. "For the coffee. And for your time." Then he rose, his tall frame looming over her. She found her voice, cracked but firm. "My mother isn't a thief." He paused at the door, not turning, just letting his voice carry across the hushed diner. "Then prove it." The bell chimed as he stepped outside. Eliza stood frozen, the bills on the table like blood money, her chest pounding. And then, before anyone could move, the billionaire staggered, clutching his chest. Gasps filled the diner as he collapsed to the floor, his bodyguards rushing forward. Every eye turned to Eliza, the waitress who had just spoken the impossible truth. Eliza Hollet's life had never been glamorous. At 24, she didn't dream of fancy cars, designer clothes, or sparkling parties. Her dream was simpler, harsher, keeping her mother alive one more month, one more week, one more day. Every shift at the diner chipped away at her body. Aching feet, hands cracked from constant washing, the endless smell of grease clinging to her hair. Yet she pushed on, because at the end of each shift came the thin white envelope. Her tips. Those crumpled bills and stray coins were the lifeline keeping her mother, Laura, hooked up to machines in a sterile hospital room across town. Laura Holley had once been a lively woman, her laughter filling every corner of their small apartment. But illness had stolen that joy, replacing it with labored breaths and hospital gowns. The doctors spoke in numbers: blood counts, oxygen levels, treatment costs, and Eliza listened with a breaking heart. Every time they mentioned money, she thought of the ring, that golden phoenix with the sapphire eye, sitting in a velvet box by her mother's bed. Laura had always called it a promise, but never explained from whom. Growing up, Eliza remembered touching the ring when she couldn't sleep, tracing its delicate wings, feeling the cool stone beneath her finger. She had asked once, "Mom, who gave you this?" Laura only smiled sadly and said, "Someone who mattered." That was all. It wasn't an answer. It was a wound wrapped in velvet. Life had not been kind to the Holleys. Eliza's father had died when she was 10, a mechanic taken by a workshop accident that left only debts behind. Since then, it had been just Eliza and Laura, fighting together against a world that never seemed to give them a break. Eliza worked 3 jobs through high school, gave up college, and learned to smile through exhaustion. People called her strong. She didn't feel strong. She felt like a rope stretched too thin, ready to snap. Still, there was one thing she refused to surrender: her mother's dignity. Laura had taught her that no amount of poverty could strip them of honor. They would starve before stealing, freeze before begging. That was why Gideon Pierce's words, liar or thief, stabbed so deep. They weren't just insults. They were a betrayal of her mother's entire life. On her rare nights off, Eliza sat at the hospital bedside, holding Laura's frail hand. Machines beeped softly, filling the silence. Sometimes Laura would wake, smile faintly and whisper, "Don't let them break you, Eliza." Eliza would nod, blinking back tears. She wished she could promise her mother the world, but all she had to offer was her weary presence. The bills piled higher every week. The diner's paycheck could never keep up. Debt collectors called, their voices cold and sharp. Eliza lied to her mother, insisting everything was fine. But inside, she was drowning. Every dollar stretched, every meal skipped, every hour stolen from sleep. It all carved lines of quiet suffering across her young face. And yet the ring remained. Even when they pawned furniture, sold jewelry, and gave up comfort after comfort, Laura never let go of that ring. "It's not about money," she once told Eliza. "It's about truth. One day it will matter." Eliza hadn't believed her until last night, until she saw the identical ring on Gideon Pierce's hand. She couldn't shake the image of his face when she mentioned it, the flicker of fear, the storm behind his eyes. She had touched a nerve. But why? What did her mother's ring have to do with one of the most powerful men in America? The thought haunted her as she sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, staring at the untouched coffee in front of her. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. A cold, precise voice came through the line. "Miss Holley, this is Gideon Pierce's attorney. We need to discuss your mother's ring immediately." Eliza froze, the phone slipping in her hand. The next evening, Eliza found herself far from the greasy booths and buzzing neon of the diner. She stood frozen at the foot of a marble staircase, staring up at chandeliers that dripped like frozen waterfalls. This was the world of Gideon Pierce. A gala, hosted at the Pierce family's private estate to raise funds for a hospital wing that cost more than Eliza could imagine in 10 lifetimes. The invitation had come unexpectedly, delivered in a thick ivory envelope by a man in a suit who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade. Inside, embossed gold letters spelled her name: Miss Eliza Holey, guest of Gideon Pierce. Her hands had shaken as she opened it. Part of her wanted to tear it up and forget him. But another part, the part haunted by the identical rings, needed answers. Now she was here, wearing the only dress she owned that passed for formal. It was plain navy, second-hand, the hem taken up unevenly by her own clumsy stitches. She felt like a child crashing a costume ball. Around her, women shimmered in sequins, diamonds flashing at their throats. Men in tuxedos moved with easy grace, sipping champagne that cost more than Eliza's monthly rent. She clutched her thrift store clutch tighter, reminding herself why she had come. Not to belong, not to impress, to find out the truth. The grand hall buzzed with power. Oil paintings of long-dead Pierces lined the walls, their stern eyes seeming to judge every guest. Waiters glided between tables, carrying trays of caviar and crystal flutes. A string quartet played softly, their music rising and falling like the heartbeat of wealth itself. Eliza spotted Gideon across the room. He was impossible to miss. Even among senators, CEOs, and celebrities, he stood out, tall, composed, radiating command. His suit was black, tailored so perfectly it seemed hoved on to him. The ring gleamed on his hand, that cursed phoenix staring at her from across the room. Her stomach twisted. He hadn't seen her yet. For a moment, she considered slipping out, retreating back to her world, where people didn't look at you like a bug under glass. But before she could move, a voice at her side stopped her. "You must be Miss Holey." She turned. A younger man, perhaps mid-30s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. He introduced himself as Aaron Welsh, Gideon's longtime assistant. Unlike his employer, Aaron's handshake was warm. "Mr. Pierce wanted you here," Aaron said gently, as if sensing her discomfort. "He believes discussions are better in person." Eliza's throat tightened. "Why me? Why this place?" Aaron's eyes flickered toward Gideon, then back. "Because here, he controls the stage." Before she could ask more, the sound of glass tapping filled the room. Gideon had stepped onto the dais, the spotlight bathing him in gold. The crowd hushed instantly. He spoke with ease, praising the generosity of his guests, promising that tonight's donations would change lives. The audience hung on his every word. To them, he was not ruthless or arrogant. He was a savior. Eliza's blood boiled. How could he stand there, draped in admiration, while accusing her mother of theft? As the applause thundered, Gideon's gaze swept the room and locked on hers. A faint smile curved his lips. Not the polite smile he gave the others, but one meant only for her. It was both a challenge and a warning. Her heart pounded. She didn't belong here, but there was no turning back. She had stepped into his world, and he would make sure she felt it. Aaron leaned close, whispering urgently, "Whatever happens next, don't show fear." At that exact moment, Gideon began walking directly toward her. Gideon Pierce cut through the glittering crowd like a blade through silk. Every step he took was measured, powerful, as though the polished marble floor belonged solely to him. Eliza tried to stand tall, though every instinct screamed at her to shrink back. When his eyes locked onto hers, she felt the weight of his entire empire pressing down on her shoulders. "Miss Holey," he said smoothly, his voice a velvet-covered knife, I was hoping you would accept my invitation." Her mouth went dry. She forced herself to nod. "I came for answers." "Answers," Gideon repeated, his lips curling into something that was not quite a smile. "A dangerous pursuit, especially when one does not understand the questions." Around them, the party swirled on, but Eliza felt as if the room had emptied, leaving only the two of them standing in a charged silence. The chandelier light glinted off his ring, mocking her. "You accused my mother of being a thief," she whispered fiercely. "She's not. She would never be." His expression hardened, the charming mask slipping. "Then explain how she possesses a ring that has been in my family since before your mother was born." "It was given to her," Eliza shot back, "by someone who mattered." That phrase, her mother's phrase, made Gideon's jaw tighten. He leaned closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Be careful with your words, Miss Holay. You're playing with a legacy older and stronger than you can imagine." Aaron Welsh, standing a few paces away, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted between Eliza and his employer, as though silently urging Gideon to ease up. But Gideon thrived on intimidation. His gaze sharpened, dissecting her as if she were a puzzle piece out of place. "You see," Gideon continued, straightening to address her like a courtroom adversary, "theft runs deeper than money. It is the theft of reputation, of legacy, of truth. If your mother claims this ring, she has stolen all three. And you, Miss Holay, by defending her, are complicit." The words stung, but Eliza refused to let her voice shake. "If my mother's ring is proof of something, maybe it's proof your family isn't as clean as you pretend." A collective gasp rippled from a nearby cluster of guests who overheard. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The predator had been challenged in his own den. For the first time, Gideon's smile cracked into something colder, uglier. "You dare," he hissed, his eyes flashing like steel drawn from its sheath. Eliza's pulse hammered. "I dare because you're wrong, and I will prove it." Gideon straightened, his composure sliding back into place like armor. He looked around deliberately, making sure the curious onlookers saw his calm disdain. "So be it," he said loudly, his tone carrying across the hall. "If the Holay girl wishes to play with fire, then let the world watch her burn." The room buzzed with whispers. Cameras from gossip journalists turned in their direction. The billionaire had drawn a line in public, and the waitress had been dragged into the spotlight. Aaron stepped forward, quietly murmuring to Eliza, "This isn't just a conversation anymore. It's war." She swallowed hard, refusing to look away from Gideon's piercing stare. In that moment, she understood he wouldn't stop until he had broken her, or until the truth broke him. Then, before she could respond, Gideon raised his glass and declared loudly, "Tomorrow, the Holay ring will be exposed for what it truly is." The gala resumed, but the energy in the room had shifted. The hum of polite conversation had given way to a current of tension, sharp and electric. Everywhere Eliza turned, she caught whispers and sidelong glances. The poor waitress had dared to stand toe-to-toe with Gideon Pierce, and now every guest waited for the spectacle that was sure to follow. She wanted to leave. Every fiber of her being begged her to run out the gilded doors and back to the safety of fluorescent diner lights. But her mother's face appeared in her mind, pale against hospital sheets, eyes burning with the command, "Don't let them break you." Eliza's feet rooted to the marble floor. Then Gideon struck. He tapped his glass again, commanding silence with the ease of a king silencing his court. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang, calm and steady, "tonight we are gathered in generosity, in truth, in honor. But it seems there are some among us who do not understand the meaning of those words. The crowd hushed, eager like wolves circling for blood. Gideon turned, his icy gaze landing on Eliza. "This young woman," he said, his tone laced with disdain, "has made outrageous claims regarding my family's most sacred possession. She accuses without proof. She insults a legacy built on integrity." Eliza's chest tightened. Murmurs rose. "Who is she? How dare she?" And heat crawled up her neck. But Gideon wasn't finished. "Perhaps you think I exaggerate," he continued smoothly. "But let me ask you, what kind of person suggests their mother holds stolen property, a liar, a thief, or perhaps something worse?" Laughter rippled through the hall, cruel and sharp. Eliza's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream, to tell them her mother was none of those things. But Gideon had set the stage, and every spotlight shone on him. He gestured to a glass case brought forward by an assistant. Inside lay documents and photos, proof of the Pierce ring's lineage, certificates signed, sealed, paraded like holy scripture. "This ring," he announced, raising his hand so the sapphire gleamed, "has been passed down through generations of Pierces. Its twin does not exist, unless, of course, someone forged it." Gasps echoed. All eyes swung back to Eliza. Gideon's smile cut through her like ice. "Tell us, Miss Holley," he called, his voice deliberately booming. "How did your mother come to possess her ring? Did she purchase it, find it, or did she steal it?" The words landed like stones hurled in public square. People leaned forward, hungry for her answer. Eliza's throat closed. She wanted to speak, but every memory of her mother's frail smile, every bedtime story of honor, every warning not to sell the ring, choked her voice. She managed only one sentence. "My mother is not a thief." Her voice trembled, but it carried. Some guests exchanged skeptical looks, others scoffed outright. Gideon laughed, a slow, deliberate sound that humiliated her more than shouting ever could. "If she is not," he said, "then prove it. Show us your ring. Let the world—" Eliza froze. The velvet box was at the hospital, where her mother kept it under lock and care. She had nothing with her, nothing to shield her from his accusation. The audience waited. Gideon's eyes glittered with victory, and then, just as her silence stretched too long, Aaron Welsh stepped forward, clearing his throat. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. "I have something to say about the Holley ring." Every head in the hall snapped toward him. The air in the hall had turned poisonous. Gideon Pierce stood tall, his ringed hand gleaming like a weapon, his smile sharp as broken glass. Eliza Holley stood alone, small against the backdrop of gold and marble. The crowd murmured hungrily, waiting for her humiliation to finish unfolding. Then Aaron Welsh's voice cut through. "I have something to say about the Holley ring." All eyes shifted to him. Gideon's gaze hardened, a storm of warning flashing in his blue eyes. But Aaron pressed on. "I've seen it. The ring Miss Holley's mother keeps. It is no forgery." The room buzzed. Gideon's jaw clenched. "Careful, Aaron," he said softly, but the threat carried. Aaron swallowed hard. "It bears the same crest, the same craftsmanship, and more. It carries an engraving, words I recognized from the Pierce family archives." Gasps spread like wildfire. Eliza felt her knees weaken. Proof, real proof. For the first time, the scales tipped in her favor. Gideon moved quickly, reclaiming control. "An assistant's opinion does not outweigh history," he thundered. "Documents, lineage, decades of truth. These cannot be undone by a servant's whispers. The guests nodded, swayed back to his side. Aaron's courage faltered, his words drowned by Gideon's authority. Eliza's hope wavered, and then she remembered. Her mother's voice, weak but fierce. "Don't let them break you." Her chest tightened, her hands trembled. She looked around at the faces watching, some mocking, some pitying. And suddenly, the fear snapped. The exhaustion, the hunger, the endless humiliation, everything boiled into a single burning flame inside her. Eliza took a step forward. Her voice was steady, stronger than she felt. "You stand here talking about honor," she said, loud enough for the crowd. "But you know the truth, Gideon Pierce." The billionaire froze. A hush fell. Eliza's eyes locked on his, refusing to flinch. Then she said the sentence that shattered the hall. "My mother never stole anything. You stole her life." The words cut sharper than any evidence. They weren't just accusation. They were truth bleeding in public. The audience gasped, whispers exploding into chaos. The image of the untouchable billionaire cracked, his perfect armor dented by the poor waitress he had tried to destroy. Gideon's face drained of color. For a moment, he wasn't the predator, the tycoon, the man of power. He was exposed, cornered. His hand twitched at his side, gripping the ring as if it could shield him. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, sympathy flickering toward Eliza. Others stared at Gideon with suspicion. The tide was turning. Aaron's voice, quiet but firm, added fuel. "She speaks the truth. Records exist. Letters, contracts, things I have seen myself. If you continue this lie, Mr. Pierce, it will not hold." Gideon's composure cracked. His voice, usually smooth as silk, rose with anger. "Enough!" But the crowd had already heard too much. His anger only made him look desperate. Eliza stood straighter, her heart pounding, but her voice calm. "You wanted proof? I am the proof. Because if that ring is unique, then explain why my mother has one too. Explain why she kept it hidden for decades. Explain why you fear the truth being spoken out loud." The silence that followed was deafening. Gideon's empire, his reputation, his carefully curated image. One sentence had struck it all like lightning. He staggered back a step, sweat beading at his temple. His eyes darted across the audience, seeing judgment where once there had only been admiration. And then, in front of everyone, Gideon Pierce collapsed for the second time. The hall erupted in chaos. Guests gasped, chairs scraped, and the string quartet faltered mid-note. Gideon Pierce, the titan of industry, the man who commanded boardrooms and bent politicians, lay sprawled on the marble floor, clutching his chest. For a moment, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a broken man stripped of all armor. Paramedics rushed in. His bodyguards cleared space, barking orders, but no one missed the shift in the room's energy. The whispers weren't about concern. They were about shame. "He collapsed after she spoke," one guest murmured. "Maybe the girl was right," another whispered. The tide of public opinion was turning like a wave Eliza never thought she'd see. She stood frozen, her breath shallow, heart racing. All she had wanted was to protect her mother's honor. Now the most powerful man in the city was crumbling in front of her eyes. Hours later, Gideon was stabilized at the hospital. The gala ended in hushed tones, reporters swarming outside. Headlines the next morning blared, "Billionaire Pierce confronted by Waitress collapses at gala." The story was everywhere, and for the first time, Eliza wasn't invisible. She was the center of it, but with attention came danger. Gideon's lawyers tried to spin the story, calling her a fraud, a gold digger. Yet the more they fought, the more the truth clawed its way out. Aaron stepped forward, risking everything. He produced hidden records, letters from decades past, documents proving that the Pierce dynasty had buried a secret marriage between Gideon's late father and a woman who was not part of their acceptable circle. That woman was Laura Hollet. The revelation exploded across the media. Eliza wasn't a liar. She wasn't a thief. She was family. Blood of the Pierces. The ring her mother held was no forgery. It was a twin, forged by love, meant as a promise. Public outrage grew. Investors distanced themselves from Gideon. Board members forced him to resign, citing health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The empire he had built on intimidation and lies had cracked beyond repair. Meanwhile, Eliza found herself in a position she had never imagined. Reporters chased her, lawyers called, and offers poured in. But she refused the circus. All she wanted was for her mother to be safe, to be remembered not as a thief, but as the woman she truly was. Laura, frail but still fierce, listened as Eliza told her everything. Tears filled her eyes. "You gave me back my dignity," she whispered. Eliza squeezed her hand, whispering back, "You never lost it, Mom. They just tried to take it away." For once, the hospital bills weren't a looming shadow. A trust fund, rightfully hers, covered Laura's treatment. But more than money, they had won something priceless: the truth. Weeks later, Eliza walked through the diner where it had all begun. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the same worn booths lined the walls. But people didn't look at her the same way anymore. Some nodded respectfully, others smiled warmly. She wasn't just the tired waitress anymore. She was the girl who had stood up to a billionaire and won. On the night Laura returned home, Eliza opened the velvet box. The phoenix ring glowed softly under the lamplight. She slipped it back onto her mother's thin finger. "It's where it belongs," she said. Laura's smile was weak but radiant. "And so are you, Eliza." Eliza leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, tears blurring her vision. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest lifted. The fight was over. They had survived. And somewhere across the city, Gideon Pierce sat alone in his vast, empty mansion. His power gone, his reputation shattered, his empire crumbling. The man who once towered over everyone now had nothing but silence. Eliza closed her eyes, whispering, "The promise has been kept." The days following the gala were a blur of headlines, whispers, and doubt. Eliza had never seen her name in print before, let alone across national newspapers. Waitress accuses billionaire. Gala scandal erupts. Each article painted her differently: a hero, a troublemaker, a fraud. She stopped reading after the third one. But one thing was certain. People were asking questions. Questions Gideon Pierce had worked for years to bury. Aaron Welsh found her in the hospital cafeteria, where she sat hunched over a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His tie was loosened, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but his voice carried determination. "You need to see something," he said quietly. He slid an envelope across the table. The paper was worn, yellowed at the edges, sealed with the faded crest of Pierce Holdings. Eliza's fingers trembled as she picked it up. "What is this?" she asked. "Proof," Aaron replied, "the kind they can't spin away." Inside were documents, letters, contracts, even a marriage certificate. The name jumped off the page: Laura Hollet. Her mother's name, written in ink alongside that of a Pierce patriarch. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was history. Eliza's throat tightened. She traced her mother's signature with shaking fingers. She was married? Aaron nodded. In secret. They didn't want the world to know. The family forced it underground, erased her from every record. But they couldn't erase everything. Her mind reeled. Her mother had never spoken of this. She had always guarded the ring, called it a promise, but never told Eliza what it truly meant. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. "You work for him." Aaron leaned in, lowering his voice. "Because I've spent 10 years cleaning up Gideon's lies. I can't do it anymore. He destroyed too many lives, including yours. This is the truth, and it belongs to you." Eliza's eyes stung with tears. She had spent her whole life believing she and her mother were nobodies, struggling in the shadows. Now, in front of her, lay proof they were tied by blood to the empire that had crushed them. But truth was dangerous. If Gideon found out Aaron had betrayed him, there would be consequences. "You should take this to a lawyer," Aaron urged. "Someone you can trust. These papers, they change everything." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit the screen. "Stop digging or your mother pays the price." Her stomach dropped. The timing wasn't coincidence. Someone knew. Someone was watching. She shoved the phone into her pocket, forcing her breathing to steady. She couldn't let Aaron see her panic. But inside, she was shaking. If Gideon's people were willing to threaten her mother, then this wasn't just about rings or names anymore. This was war. She gathered the papers back into the envelope, clutching it to her chest like a shield. For the first time, she had a weapon of her own. But weapons painted targets, and she knew she was already in the crosshairs. Aaron rose, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Be careful, Eliza. You have more power than you realize. And power makes enemies." Eliza looked down at the envelope, the faded ink of her mother's name staring back at her. The truth was finally in her hands, but it felt heavy, like it could either save them or destroy them completely. That night, as she walked home in the dark, a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and a familiar cold voice said, "Get in, Miss Holley." Eliza's hands were still trembling when she pushed open the door to her mother's hospital room. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above, casting a pale glow over Laura Holley's frail figure. Machines beeped steadily, each sound both a comfort and a reminder that time was running out. "Sweetheart," Laura rasped, her voice paper-thin. "You look pale. What happened?" Eliza forced a smile, but the envelope in her purse weighed on her like lead. Proof of secrets, proof of betrayal. Proof that could shatter their fragile world. "Nothing," Eliza whispered, sitting at her mother's bedside. She reached for Laura's hand, cold and delicate, veins like blue threads under skin that had grown too thin. "Just a long day." But Laura's eyes, still sharp despite her illness, narrowed. "Don't lie to me. You have your father's face when you're hiding something." The words cut deep. Eliza had no father in her memory, only stories, only fragments. And now, documents told her even those fragments might be lies. Her throat burned as she struggled to hold it in. But the dam broke. Tears spilled, hot and unstoppable. "Mom, they're saying things about you, about us, that you stole, that you lied. And I don't know how to stop them." Laura's hand squeezed weakly, her voice trembling. "Who is saying this?" Eliza hesitated. Should she tell her the truth? That Gideon Pierce himself, the untouchable billionaire, was trying to crush them? That his lawyers were circling like vultures? that she held papers in her bag proving everything her mother had hidden for decades. She couldn't. Not now. Not when her mother's health was so fragile. Instead, she broke down completely, laying her forehead against Laura's hand. I can't fight them. They're too powerful. I'm just a waitress. I'm nothing. Laura's eyes glistened, but her voice carried a strength Eliza hadn't heard in months. You are not nothing. You are my daughter, and you have more strength in your little finger than those men have in all their money. Eliza shook her head, sobbing harder. They'll destroy us. They'll destroy you. I don't know what to do. Laura's hand trembled as she reached for Eliza's face, brushing away her tears. Listen to me. I made mistakes. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I thought hiding the truth would keep us safe. But lies don't protect. They only poison. Promise me, Eliza. Don't let fear silence you the way it silenced me. Eliza's heart clenched. The envelope burned in her bag like fire. She wanted to tell her mother about the marriage certificate, about the proof Aaron had given her. She wanted to scream that everything they'd lived through, the poverty, the shame, the endless struggle, was because of the Pierce family's cruelty. But then Laura coughed violently, her body racked with spasms that sent alarms blaring on the monitor. Nurses rushed in, shouting orders. Eliza scrambled back, tears streaming as they worked to stabilize her mother. Minutes felt like hours before the room calmed. Laura lay still, breathing shallowly. A nurse touched Eliza's shoulder gently. She needs rest. Too much stress is dangerous. Eliza nodded, numb. She stepped into the hallway, her chest hollow. For years she had carried her mother's burden, but now the weight was unbearable. She was crumbling under it. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, a picture. Her apartment door, taken from the street. The caption, "You've been warned." Eliza's breath caught. Fear iced her veins. They weren't just threatening anymore. They were watching. And then, from inside her mother's room, she heard her mother whisper a name Eliza had never heard before. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, its ceilings too high, its walls lined with portraits of judges who had long since faded into history. For Eliza Hollet, it felt like stepping into another world, one she had no business being in. She smoothed her thrift store skirt with trembling hands, clutching the envelope Aaron had given her like it was a lifeline. On the other side of the room, Gideon Pierce sat with the confidence of a king in his throne. His suit was flawless, his posture unshakable. Beside him, a row of lawyers in sharp grey suits whispered quietly, their briefcases stacked like weapons of war. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough to tilt the scales. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Eliza followed, her knees weak. She could feel eyes on her, reporters, curious onlookers, even wealthy donors who had shown up to witness the spectacle. To them, it wasn't just a case. It was entertainment. A billionaire against a nobody. The proceedings began. Gideon's lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a voice smooth as silk, stood first. "Your Honor," he said, his tone practiced, "we are here today to expose a fraud. This young woman claims her mother possesses a ring belonging to the Pierce family, an heirloom passed down for over a century. We will prove that ring is a forgery, and that Miss Hollet is perpetuating lies to extort my client." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The word extort hung heavy in the air. Eliza's cheeks burned, but she bit her tongue. Then her lawyer, a woman recommended by Aaron, not polished but fiercely determined, rose. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "what the defense calls lies, we call evidence. We will show this court documents, letters, and testimonies proving that Laura Holey was not only in possession of the ring legally, but that she was once tied to the Pierce family itself. What Mr. Pierce once buried is not fraud, it is truth. Gideon's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained calm. The judge leaned forward. Proceed. The lawyers went back and forth, each word like a knife. Gideon's team presented expert jewelers who swore the ring could not have been replicated. Eliza's lawyer countered with photographs of the second ring, the engraving that matched family records. But the courtroom was a stage, and Gideon knew how to perform. At one point, his lawyer turned directly toward Eliza. "Miss Holey," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "are we to believe your sickly mother held on to a priceless artifact for decades without ever selling it, despite drowning in medical debt?" The implication stung. Eliza forced herself to meet his gaze. "Because it wasn't about money," she said quietly. "It was about truth. My mother knew that." Some in the gallery shifted, whispers spreading. Gideon's lawyer smirked, but the judge raised a hand. Order. The session dragged on, the weight of every word crushing Eliza's spirit. She could feel Gideon watching her, his confidence unshaken. He was certain he would win, not because he was right, but because he always did. Then, just as the judge was preparing to adjourn, a new voice rose from the back. An older man, his hair white, his suit modest, stepped forward. His voice carried across the silent courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, "I have testimony that concerns the Holey ring and the Pierce family's efforts to conceal its origin." Eliza turned, her heart thundering. She had never seen him before, but the way Gideon's face drained of color told her everything she needed to know. The man walked forward, holding a worn leather briefcase, and said, "My name is Henry Dalton. I was there the night the promise was made." The courtroom stilled as Henry Dalton's voice echoed. He stood straight despite his age, gripping the worn leather briefcase as if it held the weight of a lifetime. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, fixed not on the judge, not on Eliza, but on Gideon Pierce. "I was there," Henry repeated, his tone cutting through the silence. "The night Laura Holey was promised a life she never received." A ripple of gasps spread through the gallery. Gideon's lawyers exchanged frantic whispers, but Gideon himself froze, his jaw clenched so tightly a vein throbbed at his temple. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Dalton, are you claiming you have relevant testimony?" Henry nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I was an accountant for the Pierce family decades ago. I witnessed a private ceremony, an exchange of vows, between Alaric Pierce, Gideon's father, and Laura Holey. The ring was part of that vow. There were two of them, crafted to symbolize their union. One for him, one for her." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge banged the gavel. "Order!" Eliza's breath caught in her throat. Her mother? Married? To Gideon's father? The truth was more explosive than she had ever imagined. Gideon finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "This is slander. My father would never—" Henry cut him off. "Your father did. I stood in that room. I saw the vows exchanged. I saw him slip the ring onto Laura's finger. And I saw the fury of your grandfather when he found out. They erased her. Erased their child. Erased the truth. And his voice faltered. "I was paid to help bury it." A stunned silence fell. Eliza's knees weakened. She was the erased child, the forgotten truth. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Do you have proof of these claims, Mr. Dalton?" Henry opened the briefcase with trembling hands. Inside lay letters, financial ledgers, and photographs yellowed with age. He held up a black-and-white picture. Laura, radiant in a simple dress, standing beside a young man Eliza recognized instantly from portraits in the Pierce estate. Alaric Pierce, Gideon's father. Gasps shook the room again. Gideon's face drained of color, his confidence cracking under the weight of evidence. "This is a forgery," his lead attorney barked. Henry's voice rose, iron in his tone. "No. This is the truth I should have revealed decades ago. I was a coward then. I refuse to die one now." Eliza's chest ached. Her mother hadn't lied. She hadn't stolen. She had been betrayed by the most powerful family in the city and silenced by their greed. The judge studied the photograph, the documents, the trembling old man who risked everything to speak. "These materials will be admitted for review," he said firmly. Gideon slammed a hand onto the table, the ring flashing under the fluorescent lights. "This means nothing," he roared. "You're all being manipulated by a dying old man and a desperate waitress." But the room no longer belonged to him. The tide had turned. Eliza stood, her voice shaking but resolute. "You can't erase the truth anymore, Gideon. Not when the whole world can see it." The gallery erupted into murmurs, cameras flashing like lightning. For the first time, Gideon Pierce looked small, cornered, afraid. Then the judge raised a hand. "We will recess until tomorrow. The court will reconvene with further evidence." The gavel struck. Eliza exhaled, her hands trembling, but her heart steadier than it had been in years. She was winning. For once, she was winning. But as she stepped out into the crowded hallway, her phone buzzed with a new message. A photo of her mother's hospital room taken through the window. The text read, "Truth has a price. Pay it, or she pays instead." Eliza's blood turned to ice as she realized the fight wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed louder than ever. Reporters filled every bench, cameras clicked outside the doors, and the world leaned in for the next chapter of the Holé versus Pierce saga. For once, Eliza Holé wasn't just a poor waitress fighting shadows. She was the center of a battle that had gripped the entire city. But her heart still raced as she clutched the small velvet box in her trembling hands. Inside was her mother's most guarded possession, the ring. The one that Gideon swore could not exist. The one that Henry Dalton's testimony claimed was forged alongside his father's. When the judge entered, the room rose in unison. Eliza swallowed hard, knowing what she was about to do could change everything. She had spent the night debating. Showing the ring meant exposing her mother further, risking more attacks. But hiding it meant letting Gideon win. And she couldn't let that happen. Not anymore. The proceedings began. Gideon sat rigid, his lawyers flanking him like vultures. He had regained some composure, but his eyes betrayed unease. Henry Dalton sat in the witness box, papers stacked neatly before him, his frail body propped upright by determination alone. "Miss Holé," the judge said, turning toward her, "do you have further evidence to present?" Eliza stood slowly, the box heavy in her palm. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." The gallery leaned forward, breaths held. With shaking fingers, Eliza opened the box and lifted the ring into the light. Gasps rippled through the room. Even Gideon's attorneys leaned closer, their polished masks slipping. It was identical. The same pale gold band, the same etched phoenix, the same sapphire eye that gleamed like a captured star. But Eliza wasn't finished. Her voice, though soft, carried through the hushed chamber. "This ring is not just a copy. It holds something more." She turned the band, revealing the faint engraving inside. Words etched with care, still legible despite decades of wear. To my Polaris forever, AP. The courtroom exploded with noise. Reporters shouted, people gasped. The gavel pounded for order. "Silence!" the judge barked. Gideon's face turned ashen. His hand twitched toward his own ring, as if to shield it from scrutiny. Eliza's lawyer seized the moment. "Your Honor, this engraving matches records from the Pierce family archives, words Alaric Pierce often used to describe his beloved. Polaris, his guiding star. These rings were not mass-produced. They were a pair, created for Alaric and his chosen wife." The judge motioned for the bailiff to take the ring. Carefully, it was passed to the bench. The judge examined it under the light, his brow furrowing. Gideon surged to his feet. "Forgery!" he shouted. "This is a trick!" But his voice cracked. His rage sounded less like confidence and more like desperation. Henry Dalton's voice rang out from the witness stand. "I saw him give that ring to Laura Hollet. With my own eyes, I watched the vows. That inscription proves it. No one else knew those words." The judge looked from the ring to Gideon, then to Eliza. The weight of truth pressed heavy on the room. Eliza's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "My mother is not a thief. She is your erased history. And this ring is the proof you can't bury anymore." The gallery buzzed with agreement, the tide shifting irrevocably. Gideon's empire of lies was cracking, one fracture at a time. The judge leaned back, expression grave. "Mr. Pierce, the evidence before us cannot be ignored. The court will consider this carefully." But Gideon wasn't listening. His face had gone pale, his body trembling. He stumbled back a step, gripping the table as though the world was tilting beneath him. And in that moment, in front of the judge, the lawyers, and the world, Gideon Pierce collapsed once again. This time not from shock, but from the weight of a truth he could no longer escape. The gavel slammed down as chaos erupted in the courtroom. Paramedics rushed to Gideon Pierce's side, their voices urgent, their hands steady, as they laid him flat on the floor. His once commanding presence was reduced to gasps and groans, his face drained of its usual authority. The mighty billionaire, the man who had humiliated others without mercy, now clutched desperately at life under the eyes of the world. Reporters shoved forward, snapping pictures as security tried to block them. Headlines were already writing themselves. Pierce collapses under crossfire of truth. Eliza stood frozen, the ring box still clutched in her hands. She should have felt victorious, vindicated. But instead, an ache gripped her chest. She had wanted justice, not this spectacle of human frailty. "Clear the courtroom," the judge barked, pounding the gavel again. "This session is adjourned until further notice." As the crowd was ushered out, Eliza caught one last glimpse of Gideon. Oxygen mask pressed against his face, his hand still clenched around his own ring, as if refusing to let go of the last piece of control he had left. Hours later, the news spread like wildfire. Gideon Pierce was in critical condition, transported to a private wing of the city hospital. His company's stock dipped, investors panicked, and whispers began in the marble halls of corporate power. Could Pierce Holdings survive without its ruthless leader? Eliza sat in the hospital waiting room, her nerves raw. She wasn't there for Gideon. She was there for her mother. But fate had twisted the two together, binding their lives with threads she could neither untangle nor escape. Aaron appeared, weary but resolute. He sat beside her, lowering his voice. "This changes everything. The board will move against him now. The cracks in his empire are widening. With Gideon weakened, they'll turn on him to protect themselves." Eliza shook her head. I don't care about his empire. I care about my mother. Every time we push for the truth, she gets threatened. Aaron's eyes darkened. That's why you need protection. These people play dirty, Eliza. They've silenced witnesses before. Henry Dalton took a risk stepping forward. He won't be safe either. Eliza's stomach knotted. Henry had already sacrificed so much, carrying guilt for decades. And now his bravery painted a target on his back. She thought of her mother's fragile frame, of the threats already sent to her phone. The closer they came to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. The tool. Across town, in the Pierce estate, board members gathered in hushed panic. Gideon's absence left a vacuum, and vultures circled. Some whispered about replacing him permanently. Others feared the scandal would drag them all down. The family name, once untouchable, was bleeding in public, and in his hospital bed, Gideon drifted in and out of consciousness. Machines beeped around him, sterile light replacing chandeliers and applause. He saw flashes, his father's face, the vow exchanged, the moment the ring slipped onto Laura's finger. He had buried it all, convinced himself it was gone. But truth had a way of clawing back to the surface. When his eyes opened fully, he found Aaron standing at the foot of his bed. Gideon's voice cracked, weaker than it had ever sounded. "You betrayed me." Aaron's jaw tightened. "No, you betrayed yourself." Gideon turned his face away, shame flickering in his tired eyes. For the first time, he wasn't the predator. He was the hunted, cornered by the truth he had spent a lifetime running from. Eliza, meanwhile, paced the hospital corridor, her thoughts heavy. She had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The threats would only escalate. And now, Gideon's empire was collapsing, its pieces falling in every direction, toward her mother, toward anyone connected. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a picture. It was a video. Grainy footage of Henry Dalton walking down a dark street. A voice off-screen whispered, "One witness down, one to go." Eliza's blood ran cold as the video cut to black. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and dread. Eliza sat slumped in a plastic chair outside her mother's room, clutching the velvet ring box like a shield. Every buzz of her phone made her flinch. Every footstep made her heart jolt. She couldn't shake the video. The shadowy figure following Henry Dalton. The whispered threat. She thought the night couldn't grow heavier, until she saw him. 2 guards flanked a wheelchair rolling down the hall, and in it, pale and diminished, sat Gideon Pierce. His usual aura of invincibility was gone. The sharp suit was replaced with a hospital gown, his skin ashen, his lips drawn tight against the oxygen tubes. Yet his eyes, those icy, piercing eyes, still carried the weight of a man used to owning every room he entered. The chair stopped at Laura Hollet's door. Eliza leapt to her feet. "You don't get to come in here!" she snapped, anger surging. But Laura's frail voice drifted from inside. "Let him." Eliza froze. "Mom, no." "Let him," Laura repeated, stronger this time. The guards opened the door, wheeling Gideon inside. Eliza followed, her fists clenched, ready to pull him out if he so much as raised his voice. Laura lay propped against her pillows, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with clarity. She stared at Gideon for a long moment, silence pressing the room like a storm. Finally, she whispered, "It took you long enough." Gideon swallowed hard. For once, the billionaire had no words. His gaze fell to the floor, shame softening his features. Laura coughed, then continued, "All these years, all the lies, you let them erase me. You let them erase our child." Eliza's breath caught. "Mom?" Laura didn't look at her. Her eyes stayed locked on Gideon's. "You swore I was your Polaris. You promised me forever. And then you disappeared." Tears welled in Gideon's eyes, shocking Eliza to her core. She had never imagined this man could cry. His voice broke as he whispered, "I loved you. God help me, I did. But my family, they gave me no choice. My father threatened to disown me, strip everything. I was weak. I chose power over love." Laura's lips curved into a bitter smile. "And what did that power bring you, Gideon? Look at you now. Alone. Broken. A coward who let fear define his life." He flinched, the words cutting deeper than any courtroom accusation. "I thought I could bury it. That if I never spoke your name, if I never looked at that ring, I could forget. But when I saw your daughter, I saw you, and I knew the past would not stay buried." Eliza's knees went weak. The room spun. Her mother, Gideon, a vow, a betrayal. It all crashed together in her mind like thunder. She was the erased truth. Laura reached for Eliza's hand, squeezing weakly. "Now you see, sweetheart, it was never about theft. It was about betrayal." Gideon leaned forward, his voice desperate now. "Eliza, I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you need to know. I am not your enemy. My family was. The machine I let control me was. If I could turn back time..." His voice cracked. "I would have chosen you both." Eliza's eyes burned with tears. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw the truth back in his face. Another part, deep, unwilling, felt the raw pain in his words. Laura closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her. "It's too late for regrets, Gideon. The only thing left is truth. Give it to her, or you'll die with nothing." Gideon's face crumpled. For the first time, the predator looked utterly human. Then the door burst open, and a nurse shouted, "Henry Dalton has been found, unconscious in the parking lot." The hospital room fell into silence after the nurse's announcement. Henry Dalton, Eliza's fragile lifeline of truth, was lying unconscious in the parking lot. The realization hit her like a punch. The threats weren't empty. Whoever wanted the truth buried was ready to shed blood for it. Eliza's heart pounded as she looked at her mother, then at Gideon Pierce. The once mighty billionaire sat slumped in his wheelchair, his eyes haunted. He had confessed, spilling words she never thought he was capable of saying, but confession did not erase decades of betrayal. Anger surged inside her. This man had called her mother a thief in front of hundreds, dragged their name through the mud, threatened their very survival. He had let an empire erase them like they were stains on glass. And yet when she saw the tears that had slipped down his face, when she heard his voice crack with regret, a small, unwelcome part of her softened. Was he truly her enemy? Or was he another victim of the same ruthless dynasty that had destroyed them all? "Eliza," Gideon rasped, his voice weak but urgent. "You have to protect your mother. They won't stop. Even if I wanted to. I can't shield you. Not anymore." Her fists clenched. "You think you get to warn me now? After everything? After you tried to crush us in court? After you let the world humiliate her?" His head bowed. For once, Gideon Pierce had no defense. "I was wrong. All of it. But you need to see. The enemy isn't just me. It's bigger. It's the machine I let consume me. The board, the shareholders, the family name. They'll come after you harder than they ever came after me." Eliza's chest tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to hurl every ounce of pain back into his face. But her mother stirred in the bed, whispering faintly, "Don't let hate own you, Eliza." The word struck deep. Hate was easy. Compassion was harder. But could she even afford compassion when lives were on the line? Aaron slipped into the room, his face pale. Henry's alive, but barely. He was attacked. They wanted to silence him. His eyes flicked to Gideon, and you know exactly who they are. Gideon looked away, shame painting his expression. I warned them this would happen if the truth came out. They don't care. They only care about survival, and survival to them means blood. Eliza felt the ground shifting beneath her. She wasn't just fighting one man anymore. She was fighting a machine built on lies, wealth, and power. And she was painfully aware of how small she was in comparison. But then she remembered her mother's voice, steady even in sickness. "Promise me you won't be silenced." She straightened her shoulders. "If they think threats will stop me, they don't know me at all." Aaron's eyes widened, both in admiration and fear. Gideon's gaze lifted, searching her face. For a flicker of a second, there was something almost like pride in his eyes. The moment was shattered by the buzzing of Eliza's phone. Another message. She hesitated before opening it. This time, it wasn't a picture or a video. It was just 3 words, typed in block letters. "She is next." Eliza's stomach dropped. She spun toward her mother's bed, her pulse racing. Laura lay still, unaware of the threat hanging over her life. And before Eliza could react, the hospital lights flickered, and the entire building went dark. The blackout at the hospital had rattled Eliza, but the lights returned quickly, and security swarmed the halls. Whoever had tried to intimidate her had failed, but the message was clear. They weren't done. She barely slept that night. Still, when Aaron came to her door the next morning with a grim look, she knew what was coming. "There's another gala tonight," he said. "The board will be there. So will the press. Gideon intends to speak, to regain control of the narrative." Eliza shook her head. "He can't. He almost died yesterday." Aaron's expression hardened. Gideon would crawl into that hall on his knees before letting the world see him weak. But this time, you'll have the chance to make them hear the truth. By evening, Eliza found herself once again under crystal chandeliers, her thrift store dress out of place among gowns worth fortunes. The grand ballroom was alive with murmurs, a restless crowd sensing blood in the water. The Pierce name had always commanded reverence, but now it carried scandal. Everyone wanted to see how Gideon would spin it. At the far end of the hall, Gideon appeared. He walked slowly, supported by a cane. His face, pale, but his eyes burning with the stubborn fire of a man unwilling to yield. Applause rose half-heartedly, a shadow of the adoration he once commanded. He climbed the dais, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang, thinner than usual but steady. "Rumors and lies have clouded what should be a legacy of honor. My family has built this empire on truth, integrity, and sacrifice. Do not let the jealous whispers of imposters undo decades of progress." Gasps and nods rippled through the crowd. He still had them, Eliza realized. Even after everything, he still knew how to wield words like weapons. Her stomach knotted. If she stayed silent, he would bury the truth again. She glanced at Aaron, who gave her a small nod. "Now!" Her legs trembled as she walked toward the stage. Whispers followed her. "That's her, the waitress, the girl with the ring," but she kept moving. "But Shishuhu," Gideon's eyes flicked down at her, sharp as daggers. "Miss Hollet," he said, his voice dripping disdain. "I thought you had caused enough embarrassment." Eliza took the microphone from his hand before he could stop her. The crowd gasped. Gideon's jaw clenched, fury flashing across his pale features. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied, carrying across the room. "My mother never stole. She never lied. She was the one you abandoned." The words sliced through the air like thunder. The ballroom fell silent, the kind of silence that sucked the oxygen from the room. Faces turned, eyes wide. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Reporters raised their cameras. For once, Gideon had no immediate comeback. His lips parted, but nothing came out. The image of the untouchable billionaire cracked before everyone's eyes. Eliza's heart pounded. She had said it. The truth, in one sentence, laid bare for the world. Then the murmurs began. Not against her, but against him. "Is it true?" someone whispered loudly. "Did he really abandon her? What else is he hiding?" The tide was turning, and Gideon knew it. He grabbed the microphone back, his hand trembling. "Lies!" he shouted, his composure unraveling. "This is nothing but lies!" But the more he raged, the more the audience recoiled. His anger didn't make him look strong. It made him look guilty. Aaron stepped into the spotlight, voice firm. "There are records, letters, proof, and every word she just spoke is true." The ballroom erupted, cameras flashing, voices rising. Gideon's empire of fear was collapsing in real time. And then, from the back of the hall, a voice shouted, "Check the board vote! Pierce has already been removed." The words echoed across the ballroom like a cannon shot. "Pierce has already been removed." For a moment, silence reigned. Then the crowd erupted into a frenzy of whispers, gasps, and frantic speculation. Phones lit up as board members' statements hit the press in real time. The rumors were true. The board of Pierce Holdings, under pressure from investors and scandal, had voted Gideon out of power. Eliza stood frozen in the spotlight, microphone still in her hand. She had spoken one sentence, one truth, and the unthinkable had happened. The giant had fallen. Across the stage, Gideon staggered, gripping his cane. His face, already pale from illness, drained completely of color. He shook his head slowly, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "No," he whispered, almost to himself. "They wouldn't dare." But they had. Aaron stepped forward, his phone in hand, reading the breaking news aloud. "Effective immediately. Gideon Thomason son Pierce has been removed as chairman and CEO of Pierce Holdings. Interim leadership will be appointed." The crowd buzzed with energy, the shift palpable. Just hours ago, Gideon had been the untouchable titan. Now he was a dethroned king, stripped of his crown before his own court. Eliza's heart raced. She should have felt triumph. And yet, all she felt was exhaustion. The battle wasn't over. Not with threats still looming, not with her mother's life hanging in the balance. But for the first time, the tide wasn't against her. It was carrying her forward. Gideon's eyes burned with fury as he looked at her. "You think this is victory?" he rasped. "All you've done is unleash wolves. Without me, the board will come for you, for her." He pointed weakly toward Eliza, then toward no one in particular, as if Laura's presence still haunted him. The murmurs grew louder. Some guests averted their eyes from Gideon, unwilling to be associated with his downfall. Others turned toward Eliza with something new, respect, even admiration. She was no longer the poor waitress being ridiculed. She was the girl who had stood up to a dynasty and spoken the truth. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. "Miss Hollet, do you have a comment? Are you pursuing a claim against the Pierce estate? Will you testify further? Eliza lowered the microphone, her voice firm but calm. All I ever wanted was for my mother's name to be cleared. She was never a thief. She was his family, and they erased her. That ends now. Applause broke out from unexpected corners of the room. The sound startled even Eliza. For the first time, she wasn't alone. Gideon's cane slipped as he stumbled back a step. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him, a shadow of the man who once commanded fear. Security stepped forward, uncertain whether to help him or escort him out. Aaron leaned close to Eliza. The board's decision is public. His empire is gone. You've turned the tide. Eliza exhaled, relief and terror mingling in her chest. The truth was out. The power had shifted. But Gideon's warning still echoed in her ears. Wolves. Because even without him at the helm, the machine of wealth and secrecy remained. And if what Aaron had hinted was true, they would see Eliza not as a truth-teller, but as a threat to be eliminated. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Just 2 words this time, stark and chilling. Too late. She looked up and saw a figure slipping out of the ballroom, clutching something that looked exactly like her mother's hospital bracelet. Eliza rushed back to the hospital, her heart hammering with dread. The image of that shadowy figure in the ballroom, clutching something like her mother's hospital bracelet, had burned itself into her mind. By the time she reached Laura's room, her palms were slick with sweat, and her chest ached with fear. But when she pushed the door open, her mother was there, frail, pale, but breathing steadily. Relief poured through her like rain after drought. "Sweetheart," Laura whispered, her voice barely stronger than a sigh. "You look like you've run a marathon." Eliza dropped into the chair by her side, clutching her hand. "Mom, you scared me. I thought—" Her voice broke. She couldn't say it. She couldn't admit how close she'd come to losing her. Laura gave a faint smile. "I'm tougher than I look." For a long moment, Eliza just held her hand, the steady beep of the monitor grounding her. Then Laura's expression sobered. "I heard what happened. The gala. Gideon. The ring." Eliza's stomach tightened. "It's true, isn't it? You were married to his father. You carried the truth all these years." Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Yes. Alaric loved me. For a time, I thought love would be enough to withstand his family's fury. But they crushed us. They erased me, erased you. I thought keeping silent would protect you, but silence only gave them more power." Eliza squeezed her hand tighter. "You didn't deserve that. You were never a thief. You were his wife. And now everyone knows." Laura's lips trembled into a smile. "Because of you. You gave me back what they stole. My name, my dignity." Eliza's own tears spilled. For years she had carried shame, thinking they were nothing, thinking they had no worth. Now the weight lifted, piece by piece. Just then, the doctor entered, his expression unreadable. He glanced between mother and daughter, then cleared his throat. "I have news," he said softly. Eliza braced herself. She had lived long enough to know that doctors' news was rarely good. "We reviewed the latest tests," the doctor continued. "Against the odds, there's improvement, significant improvement. The new treatment is working better than expected. Laura, you are responding. It's too early to call it a miracle, but it's close." Eliza gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Laura's eyes widened, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Are you saying I might get better?" The doctor smiled faintly. "You already are." Eliza sobbed openly, burying her face against her mother's hand. For so long, Life had been an endless tunnel of despair. And now, light. Real, blinding light. Laura stroked her daughter's hair, her own tears falling. See, sweetheart, truth heals. It always does. But even as joy filled her chest, Eliza couldn't shake the unease gnawing at the edges of her heart. The threats hadn't stopped. Henry had been attacked. Gideon had warned of wolves. And that shadowy figure with the bracelet, whoever they were still out there. Her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before checking it. A message. This time, a live feed. Her mother's hospital room. This very room, from a hidden camera. The words beneath it made her blood freeze. If she leaves this hospital, she dies. Eliza's joy curdled into terror as she realized the fight was far from over. Eliza's fingers shook as she stared at the live feed on her phone. The image was her mother's hospital room, grainy but unmistakable. The camera angle wasn't from the door or hallway, it was inside. Someone had planted a hidden device where Laura lay. Her breath caught in her throat. They're watching us. Every second. Aaron rushed into the room, his face pale when Eliza showed him the screen. This is worse than I thought, he muttered. They're not just threatening you, they're tracking you. Whoever's behind this, they want total control. Eliza's fear hardened into resolve. Then I'll face them. They want me? Fine. But they won't touch her. Aaron grabbed her arm. That's exactly what they want. They're baiting you into a trap. Her jaw tightened. Then I'll walk into it, with eyes open. That night, a message came through. A location. An abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. No words, no threats, just coordinates. Eliza knew it was insane. But she also knew there was no running. They had followed her through diners, courtrooms, and hospitals. If she didn't end it now, they would never stop. Aaron insisted on coming. You can't face this alone. The drive was silent, the city lights fading into shadow as they reached the outskirts. The warehouse loomed, rusted and hollow, its windows shattered like broken teeth. The night air carried the metallic tang of danger. Inside, the echo of their footsteps bounced off steel beams. The place was empty. Too empty. Then a voice rang out from the shadows. So, the waitress thinks she can take down an empire. Eliza's blood chilled. Figures stepped forward, faces masked, suits crisp. They weren't common thugs. They were professionals. Men who had cleaned up messes for the Pierce dynasty for decades. One of them tossed something onto the floor. Laura's hospital bracelet. Eliza lunged forward, but Aaron caught her arm. The leader chuckled. She's alive, for now. But you're out of moves, Miss Hole. Hand over the ring, the documents, and walk away. Do that. And maybe your mother keeps breathing. Eliza's mind raced. The ring box was in her purse, the documents hidden with her lawyer. If she gave them up, the truth would vanish forever. If she didn't, her mother could pay the price. Her chest heaved. She felt the walls closing in, the trap snapping shut. Aaron whispered fiercely, Don't do it. If you give them what they want, your mother's still not safe. They'll kill the both of you to erase the trail. The men stepped closer, their eyes gleaming under the flickering light. Decide, waitress. Truth or blood. Eliza's heart pounded. For years she had been powerless, pushed around by the wealthy, silenced by fear. But now she held something they wanted. That gave her leverage. Her fingers brushed the ring inside her purse. The phoenix glinted faintly in the dark, as if daring her to fight. She straightened her shoulders, her voice trembling but fierce. If you want it, you'll have to take it in front of the world. The leader's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Eliza raised her phone, the screen glowing. A red light blinked in the corner. "Because this entire meeting is live streaming right now." Gasps rippled even among the masked men. Aaron's eyes widened in shock, and then the warehouse doors slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang. The warehouse doors slammed shut, locking Eliza and Aaron inside with the masked men. The echo reverberated like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, fear gripped Eliza's throat. But then she held her ground, clutching her phone high, the red light still blinking. "Smile," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The whole world is watching." The leader's eyes widened behind his mask. He lunged, trying to snatch the phone. But Aaron moved faster, blocking him, shoving him back with a force that sent metal clanging through the empty space. "You think anyone believes a waitress?" the man sneered. Eliza's chin lifted. "They don't have to believe me. They just have to see you." Outside, sirens wailed. Red and blue lights danced across the broken windows. The stream had reached the police, reporters, and thousands of viewers who had been following the Pierce scandal. The trap meant to silence her had become a stage exposing them all. The masked men panicked. Some bolted for the side exits, only to be met by officers swarming in. Others tried to smash Eliza's phone, but by then it didn't matter. The feed was already ready, viral. The leader glared at her, rage twisting his features as his mask slipped off. It wasn't a stranger at all. It was one of Pierce Holdings' senior board members, a man who had stood on stage beside Gideon, clapping like a loyal ally. Reporters outside shouted his name as police dragged him out. The empire had rotted from within, and now the rot was laid bare. Eliza collapsed to her knees, tears spilling down her face. Not from fear this time, but from relief. For the first time, the lies weren't stronger than the truth. Aaron crouched beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it." But Eliza shook her head. "Not until Mom knows she's safe." At dawn, she returned to the hospital. Laura was awake, her eyes wide as Eliza recounted everything: the trap, the live stream, the arrests. Tears welled in her mother's eyes. "You fought for me," Laura whispered. "For us." Eliza took her hand, placing the phoenix ring gently on her finger. "No, I fought with you. You kept the promise alive. I just made sure the world saw it." News spread like wildfire. The video had gone global. Commentators hailed Eliza as the brave waitress who took down a dynasty. Victims silenced by the Pierces came forward, their stories adding weight to hers. The board dissolved under investigation, their assets frozen, their reputations shredded. And Gideon? He remained in his hospital bed, stripped of power. When reporters shoved microphones in his face, he said nothing. His silence was its own confession. Weeks later, Eliza stood outside the diner where it had all begun. The neon buzzed, the smell of grease clung to the air, but nothing felt the same. Strangers smiled at her. Some whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't invisible anymore, but the greatest victory waited at home. Laura, healthier by the day, moved slowly but proudly through their modest apartment. For the first time in years, laughter returned to their walls. One evening, as the sun set in golden streaks across the city, Eliza sat with her mother on the balcony. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of years finally lift. "They tried to erase us," she said softly, "but we are still here." Laura smiled, her eyes glistening as she held up the ring. "And we always will be." Eliza leaned against her mother's shoulder, peace flooding her chest. The battle was over. The wolves were gone. The promise was kept. And somewhere across the city, Gideon Pierce stared out his window, alone in silence, haunted not by power lost, but by the love he had thrown away. So our story comes to an end. My friends, you're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with me all the way, that means something in this journey touched your heart. And maybe that's the real gift of stories. They remind us of our own strength, our own battles, our own healing. Eliza's fight wasn't just about a ring or a billionaire. It was about dignity, truth, and the courage to speak even when your voice shakes. In life, we all face moments where silence feels easier. But as Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Eliza chose that strength, and so can you. Maybe you've been wronged. Maybe you've carried shame that was never yours to bear. Remember this: truth heals, even if it takes time. Honor can be stolen for a season, but it cannot be erased forever. If this story moved you, don't just carry it silently. Share it with a friend, with the world. And if you want to walk with us through more stories like this, hit like, share, and subscribe. Because every time we stand together in truth, we heal a little more.